Hey there, and welcome to Everything STEAM. I am your host, Sam Stanford. So, as a physicist and structural engineer in training with Jacobs Engineering, I've made many connections with some bright individuals who are either working, studying, or self taught and passionate about our particular topics of discussion. So, not to pull a Steve Harvey here, but I've got a good one for you today. I have a wonderful guest that will be sharing his experiences and knowledge about birds and the environment, as well as some other cool things that I will share here in a bit. In this episode, my guest and I are featuring birdology, involving birds and their roles in the environment, why they're significant, and what trends we are witnessing with our aviary friends that are caused by the great Anthropocene. Speaking of my guest star, meet Keith Paluso, aka Ranger Keith. He's a West Tennessee-based naturalist, environmental educator, content creator, and musician. Keith's interest in nature began at a very early age, mostly in reptiles and amphibians. By the time he was 15, he was teaching nature classes and leading trips at various camps and workshops. Keith then pursued a degree in environmental biology at the University of Tennessee at Martin, where he was a founding member of the UTM Ecology Club. In college, Keith began working for Tennessee State Parks as a park naturalist, leading trips through the swamps at Reelfoot Lake, caring for many environmental education animals, mostly raptors and snakes at the park, while rehabilitating numerous birds of prey. His time at Reelfoot Lake sparked his love for birding, and he has been hooked ever since. This pushed Keith to become a full-time park ranger for Tennessee State Parks after graduation. While a park ranger, in addition to his emergency operations and management duties, he developed the interpretive aspects of his parks, which included a weekly environmental education class for adults with intellectual disabilities. In 2017, Keith was reaching a career burnout. His wife, Bethany, suggested picking up a hobby that did not involve parks in any way. So he began making music after having put his guitars away for like 10 years. Within a few months, he found himself in an audition for season 15 of NBC's The Voice, where he made it into the top 24. He was then asked to join three-time Grammy-winning Blood, Sweat, and Tears and began touring with them internationally as their lead singer. During the brunt of the pandemic, though, Keith had begun to use birding as a mindfulness practice and decided to share that via TikTok. Having gone back to work as a park ranger to support his family, Keith recorded videos before and after his shifts at the park. The reception of those videos on TikTok and online was extremely supportive, so he ultimately decided that if touring were ever a possibility again, that he would return to it so that he could feature birds and ecological systems in places other than Western Tennessee. And in the summer of 2021, he left the parks and began slowly just doing that. Okay, now that you've been introduced to the topic of the show and my man Ranger Keith, we're going to head into our first commercial break. But stick with us, because when we come back, Keith and I will be giving an introduction to the episode and explaining just what birding is. Cheers. Keith, it's nice having you on here. So should I call you Ranger Keith or just Keith? What do you prefer?
Fine. Keith is just fine. Whatever. I'll respond to whatever.
I love the Ranger Keith. Whenever I saw that on TikTok, I was like, man, I got to get this guy on the podcast.
Man, when I originally started, I originally only ever used social media for music stuff. And then during the pandemic, I went back to being a park ranger for about 10 years altogether. And whenever the pandemic hit, all of my tours and stuff got canceled. I've got a family, I've got a mortgage and things like that. And so I went back to being a park ranger, and I was like, well, this is what I'm doing forever. And so I changed all my usernames to this is Ranger Keith and started making birding content. And then and things are different now. So
yeah, if you don't mind, I'm a little curious. What got you bogged down that like you were doing as a ranger that made you just kind of want to stop pursuing like that career?
Well, I am a. Thanks for having me, by the way, Sam.
I guess we should go.
We just jump right into it. Being working in the parks as a ranger or wherever, or any public service, but I feel like a lot of times with things like teachers or park rangers or things like that, those are passion careers. And I am a reckless workaholic, and I will sell my soul to whatever it is I'm doing right at that very moment. And so I started my career with Tennessee State Parks as a seasonal, and then went in as soon as I graduated from college, jumped in full time as a ranger at Mousetail Landing State Park, and spent my career as a full-time ranger between there and David Crockett State Park. And in Tennessee state parks, you are, as a ranger, you are like the management of the parks. You manage all the personnel and things like that. You're also emergency operations, so you're fire, medical, law enforcement, all of that stuff together. And then you also do all the interpretation and then environmental education and things like that on the park. And then also quite a bit of maintenance too, depending on the park you're in. The first park where I was a full-time ranger had like 6 employees, and so everybody cuts trail, everybody cleans up, everybody mows grass, everybody weed eats, and all that kind of stuff. And so I loved it. I loved it, and that was my entire life for a long time. I was on our special operations response team for Tennessee State Parks for a long time, which is like a statewide critical incident team, where when bad things happen, you get called out to that stuff. And so I did that for a long time, and I made a lot of friends that are closer to me than some of my family is, but there's very little room for anything else.
Oh.
And so by the time we were in the middle of 2017 or so, I knew my wife and I were getting ready to have our son. And I knew I wanted to kind of slow down, or at least find some separation for myself and my family, like be able to mentally shut things off. I lived on the park, like right smack dab in the middle of the park, as you do, which is great. But living at work is a double-edged sword. Like I could come out of my door and be on a trail, but you're also always at work.
You're always on call.
You're always on call. Live right next to the maintenance shop, which is where all of my employees were, which is you're there for your people. That's your job as the leader,
Yep.
And so my wife was like, dude, you need a hobby other than this. Like, I'm seeing signs of burnout in you, and that's a difficult thing to admit to yourself when you feel like you're extremely lucky to have the life that you have, is dealing with that burnout and also loving what you do. You know what I mean? But I felt like I needed to carve some time, or carve like a space for myself that wasn't related to that. And so I was like running ultra marathons and stuff like that. I was like taking all this stuff, but I was still on trails on the park that I worked. And so I was like inevitably seeing like things I needed to fix or things I need to do and all that. And my wife was like, look, man, you need to do something totally unrelated to that. So you have all these guitars and stuff that are in closets that have been in there for 10 years. I quit playing music when I was in college because I had to buckle down and all that stuff. Then I started my career. You're working every weekend and you live an hour away from the nearest grocery store, so you're not going to go play shows and stuff. And so I started playing some music and put some cover songs up on YouTube and stuff. And then that's where like we kind of had a monkey wrench thrown in there, and I ended up on The Voice and all of that stuff.
That's crazy. Yeah. So did somebody just see you on YouTube and they were like, we got to get this guy on? So that's so cool.
Yeah. So I like don't watch TV. I do now, but it's all like children's shows because I have a 4-year-old, But like at the time, I like we didn't have cable or anything. I didn't know how the show worked, but I got an email from somebody of my 30 subscribers on YouTube, and they were like, yo, man, there's this voice audition in Nashville. I think you should really go try. And I was like, man, what could it hurt to try? And so I went in there and sang like a couple of John Prine songs and a Ray LaMontagne song. And they were like, hey, man, we want you to come be on The Voice. And so I was like, oh, man, what am I going to do with my career? And so my wife was like, man, if you don't do this, you will regret it forever. My wife's brilliant. Like, she's the brains in the operation for sure.
Seems like a great person for sure.
She is indeed. But so I ended up on season 15 of The Voice. I started off on Blake's team and then went to the semifinal, or went to the top 24 with Kelly Clarkson.
Wow.
Which was super fun.
Heck yeah.
And then I got picked up with Blood, Sweat, and Tears after that. Right after I got off the show, maybe a couple of months after I got off the show, I got just a random phone call. I don't even know how he got my number from the manager with Blood, Sweat, and Tears, and he's like, "Hey, man, you want to come be the lead singer of Blood, Sweat, and Tears?" And I was like, "Well, when do we start rehearsals and stuff?" And
Wow.
he was like, "No rehearsals. You got a month before your first show. You need to learn all the songs. Here's a bunch of recordings of what was on the original records, and then also the way it's changed over the past like 50 years. You know,
Wow.
because things like naturally kind of evolve as new players come and go. It's
Sure.
beautiful." But yeah, he was like,
Man.
"Hey, you need to learn the average of this. There's no rehearsal. You're going to meet the band and like when you get here and play your first show in Fort Lauderdale in front of like 8,000 people." And I was like,
Wow.
"This is 100% a scam. I'm showing up to Fort Lauderdale and somebody's going to steal my kidneys." But it turned out to be legit.
Wow.
And so
Wow.
I toured with them all of 2019 and beginning of 2020, and then when the pandemic hit, we went home. And so
That's amazing.
we're home for months. I about lost my mind, and I decided to go back to what I know how to do, and I know that I'm good at. And so I went back to being a ranger until I started on TikTok, and things kind of worked out
Yeah.
again. So strangely,
Yeah, isn't that crazy? Now you have how many followers do you have on TikTok now?
we just hit 100,000 like 2
Jeez.
days ago, which is
Wow.
I'm so grateful. I mean, I'm grateful, even though we're there, even though every now and again I take like 3 weeks off of social media altogether and just vanish. And I work in my
Nice.
garden and I go bird watching by myself and all of that stuff. I just think that, if especially if my main part of my page is to do environmental education and also promote mindfulness and stuff, if I'm not being mindful and if I'm starting to look at numbers instead of
Yep.
actual humans, then I should take time off and go reconnect with real life,
Man, I totally agree with that. I totally agree with that. I can't get like a good rhythm down on TikTok either. I don't want to be a slave to, to the platform.
Sure.
Whenever I find something that I would like to stitch and explain, I do it. Whenever I have a great idea, when somebody messages me like, "Hey, you should do something like that," I put it on a list, and when I get to it, I get to it. I work a full-time job. I run this podcast, I edit, and I have to
Right.
market, and it's like it'll get there. But man, that's what a story. What a story. And you know
How?
what's funny? Like I had something similar whenever we had the big numbers podcast with Matthew Broussard.
Mm,
So I don't know if you're quite familiar, but he's a famous actor and comedian, and he's a mathematician. He's good friends with Matt Kirshen. But anyways, so I put out like a post on a subreddit. I think it was our
mhm.
math, and I'm like
Yeah.
looking for someone who wants to do a mathematics podcast. And he DM'd me, and he was telling me who he was. He sent me his YouTube, and I'm like, no way. Same thing. I'm like, this is somebody's trying to steal my kidney. There's just no way. Like,
This is a scam. It's a scam.
yeah, no, but it's funny. Like we had a phone call, we just we talked, and I'm like, that's actually Matthew Broussard. Like that's pretty wild. Yeah, and now you're on my show, and I'm getting more and more reputable and interesting people that have good followings. So like really happy to have you. Now to come full circle, really happy to have you on
Well,
the
I'm
podcast.
flattered that you think I'm important.
Oh yeah, I mean you got a really cool background, and
Thanks, man.
I think it's really another thing is I was really excited about this podcast because you know a lot about birds, and I think to the lay person or someone who just maybe even just nature lovers in general don't typically think about birds. It's not like on the forefront of their mind, right?
Mm,
When they think about wildlife, they think of I don't know, like lions or tigers or bears, literally, not to be
sure.
so scripted there, but like they don't think
Yeah.
about
Yeah.
birds,
There's
they don't think about finches or vultures, or
right.
it's just not there. But
Yeah, charismatic megafauna. That's what they're going for. That's the
yeah.
term for it in conservation biology. Charismatic megafauna.
There
It,
it is.
I didn't get into birds until I was in college. But
Okay.
I started working as a naturalist and like an
Okay.
environmental educator when I was like 14, 15. But my entire life until I started birding pretty hardcore in college, I wanted to be a herpetologist. When I was like a little bitty kid, I had posters of snakes and frogs on my wall instead of
Nice.
like cars and stuff. I remember my third grade teacher, Miss Jenkins, at Marion Elementary School. We were doing the like, "What do you want to be when you grow up?" thing,
Hmm.
and she was like, "Keith, what do you want to be when you grow up?" And I said, "A herpetologist." And she said, "I don't know what that is, but you should probably wash your hands."
That's amazing. That's
So
amazing.
that was my entire plan, was to my whole life was to go to school, go for biology, go to grad school,
Mhm.
and do all that. And I wanted to go for herpetology, and then kind of at the last minute started getting into birds, and I started working for the parks while I was in college as like a seasonal
Okay.
ranger, and then just jumped right into being a park ranger instead of grad
Hmm.
school and stuff.
Well, what drew you to birds?
Man, I was doing at the time when I started. I guess I can tell you this story later. But
Okay.
when I got started, I was a seasonal ranger. I was a park naturalist. They're either called park naturalists or seasonal interpretive rangers or whatever it is. There are a bunch of different agencies that have the same thing.
Hmm.
Um, but I was like guiding tours and stuff at Reelfoot Lake State Park, and it's part of a 30,000-acre swamp lake complex that's about 3 miles from the Mississippi River in
Nice.
northwest, like the very top northwest corner of Tennessee,
Okay.
and like the top of the lakes in Kentucky. But uh,
Oh,
at the time, I was guiding tours and stuff through the swamps, and when I was part of my duties there was wildlife rehab, and so I was doing a lot of bird of prey. Work where people would bring in injured hawks and owls and eagles and things like that, and so we would take care of them and release them back into the wild. And if they weren't, they would be if they couldn't be released, they would be an educational animal. And so part of my job was to travel all over the place with like the glove and you have like a hawk on a glove and show it to kids and stuff like that. And so
yeah.
that's just part of my job, and that's where I started getting into it. I didn't get into like going out in the field and birding until later, but yeah,
Nice.
that's how I got into it. I mainly went to Reelfoot though to I got a job for the parks originally because I was doing research there. My undergraduate research was a herpetofaunal survey of the Reelfoot Lake and Lake Isom refuges, and so basically all summer was just catching snakes and frogs and measuring them and letting them go and saying, "Oh,
Nice.
I caught this many of this species and this many of this species," and that stuff's important. But I
Definitely.
originally started working for the park so that I could live on site there, and started my career. Had no plans of being a park ranger at all until I was there for 4 years. And then I was like, well, I'll go be a ranger.
That's awesome. So, okay, I guess now would be a good opportunity to explain what you do on TikTok. Like, what is birding? Like,
Sure. For there there's a there's a lot of arguing, I think, about birding and stuff, because some people separate birding and bird watching into two different things, where typically bird watching
oh,
is when you're watching feeder birds, and this is not a science thing, this is just like a culture of birding thing.
okay.
And then birding is when you're going out and making lists of stuff you see uh,
Oh,
out in a habitat or whatever. And that's kind of generally, the discussion. But for me, I keep some bird feeders at home, but I'm mainly more into going out and counting how many that I see and identifying them. And my main thing with that is uh, looking at migratory patterns. I love seeing when new things show up and then watching when they leave too, as far as migrants and stuff goes, and then seeing how things change their behavior throughout the year. If they're a resident, some of our resident birds that stay here year round change a lot in behavior from winter to summer. And so it's just fascinating to me. There's a lot of parts of birding. There are a lot of parts of birding culture where uh, they're typically called twitchers or listers, where people are working on a life list. Most people have like a life list of all the different species they've seen, or you have
um,
like a life list by county or life list by state or country or whatever, um, where the main thing that they're addicted to is adding a new species to that list. And so that's where you hear stories of people like this year we had a stellar sea eagle that's been in North America, and they aren't typically. And so people are flying in from everywhere to go see this stellar sea eagle. Or, I drove a long way to go see a snowy owl one time because we don't typically get those very often in Tennessee. But that's not really what I'm into. I'm into noticing patterns. You have some extremes though, for sure.
Oh,
As far as
interesting.
going and seeing new species or some new vagrant that's blown in from somewhere that, like this past year we had several limpkin that showed up in Tennessee that people got really excited about, and so everybody was looking for a limpkin. We had a burrowing owl in Tennessee, and I'm not sure how many times that has happened before, but not very many times. And people were driving from all over the place to go see this burrowing owl. The
Wow.
closest one would be in like South Florida or out west.
Oh, wow.
Mhm.
Wow. So I guess you said that whenever you go on tours with Blood, Sweat, and Tears, that you also try to get some birding in. So what's the farthest you've traveled to do this practice?
We do some touring in, we're kind of all over the US, but we do some touring into Europe too. And so I've done some birding in Norway. This past year,
Wow.
we were in Germany for like just a couple of days,
Hmm.
and no sleep to be had because we were doing shows and stuff like that. And then, the time is different. And so you're jet lagged. And I didn't have a car, but we were in, what town were we in? I can't remember. It was Munster was we
Oh,
were staying in Munster. I can't remember the name of the town, but it's beautiful, wonderful. And I was looking at a map, looking at eBird hotspots on ebird.org from the Cornell Lab of Ornithology. That's where all birders put in their lists and stuff, which is a
oh,
brilliant community science project, because then you're looking at the geographic distributions of birds in real time. It's
okay.
brilliant, brilliant as far as like value to science goes.
Yeah.
Um, but I was looking at eBird hotspots, and I found one like probably 10 or 12 miles north of the hotel I was staying. I didn't have a car there. It was in Germany. I can't read any of the road signs. And this is
Yeah.
like rural Germany too. And so it's
Oh
like,
boy.
I got to get to this place. I got to find a like a bus or something that'll take me there at like 5 in the morning. And but I was talking to the person that worked at the front desk at the hotel. I was like, I'm a bird watcher and I want to go see these birds at this one place. And they were like, here, borrow my bicycle. And they let me borrow their bicycle and ride it off into the German countryside before daylight. But I was on this enormous waterfowl refuge
Wow.
before daylight, and it was absolutely incredible. So good.
Wow.
I think
Wow.
I think I saw like 33 lifers for me, which would be like 33 new species for my life list.
Oh,
You know,
wow. That's
yeah.
really cool. So let's finish off here. We'll go and then we'll go into our first commercial break. But what is your what is your favorite bird? Just
Man,
curious. Yeah,
probably
yeah.
changes it changes from week to week, really. You
Oh,
know,
really?
yeah,
Okay.
probably, because I get excited about new migrants when they come in. Right now, Mississippi kites. I saw my first season Mississippi kite, I think 3 days ago. But this time of year, they is when they first show up. Mississippi kites are absolutely incredible. They're a relatively large bird, but the way they fly, they just look like a piece of paper. It's just everything looks effortless to them. I think
That's
it's really
amazing.
cool. I always know that they're about to show up here because the mockingbird lives in my front yard. Probably about 2 weeks before Mississippi kites show up, the mockingbird starts doing a Mississippi kite call. They sound like,
No way. No
yeah.
way.
So I hear that mockingbird doing like, wow, Mississippi kites are going to be here soon.
So you sit whenever you do birding, do you sit there and try to call them in? Do you try to mimic their sounds, or you just like to
No,
listen to them in their environment?
no. There are some people that do that. Um, there's a kind of a code of ethics that I think people should pay more attention to. There's a great code of ethics on the American Birding Association's website, which is a great starter.
Okay.
I've done back when I first started, I didn't know the difference between like biological surveys and just playing outside because I was a biology student and it was all the same to me. So we did surveys with playback. Like in October in the fall, we're doing owl surveys where we'll play an owl call and count how many callbacks. We're seeing how many owls in the like in a are in a given area. But I don't do that when I'm on my own because you're making birds do stuff that they wouldn't normally do. And so
Yeah.
there are also some things that people do. There's one called there's a thing people do called pishing. You're imitating the stress call or like the intruder alert call of a
Oh.
Carolina chickadee or a tufted titmouse or a Carolina wren. They all make that same call. It sounds like and so a lot of people when they're trying to coax a bird out so they can see it better will go but
Oh.
I don't do that. And
It
I don't
seems
really
it
I don't
seems like another portion to that would make it kind of unethical is like if you're trying to mimic these birds and they're trying to mate,
right.
right? Wouldn't that would skew that process?
Right. Yep.
Right.
Or
Yeah.
well, not just if they're trying to mate, but if they're trying to attract a mate, you're going to
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
unnecessarily stress them out because then you're putting an imaginary competing male
Right.
in that area. Or if you're doing a stress call for like Carolina wren or a tufted titmouse, you're telling them there's danger right there.
Yeah.
And so personally, it's not something I do. But
Okay.
I'm more into just being there and seeing how they're trying to be as inconspicuous as a 6'3" giant hairy man can be, and just letting them do their thing and watching what they do.
Yeah. Oh, awesome. Well, we're going to run into our first commercial break. And whenever we come back, Keith and I are going to be talking about, well, Keith is going to be talking about birds and their influence on the environment. So stick around and find out. I have some exciting news. Everything Steam and Elite Graphics have teamed up to create Ecolite Apparel. Ecolite Apparel has a direct focus on the environment with a sustainable approach to fashion. We came up with a way to combine fashion, sustainability, and education. Firstly, our apparel is sustainable because it takes advantage of organic materials with a blend of recycled materials to combat the waste of the fashion industry. So speaking of fashion, each Ecolite product has a significant environmental symbol, such as reduce, reuse, recycle, planting trees, saving the bees, commercial fishing, and much more. Everything Steam and Elite Graphics are going above and beyond to provide you with more information about sustainability and environmentalism through the use of Ecolite. Each piece of our apparel will contain a scanned QR code, and when you scan this QR code, it takes you to Everything Steam's research blog that is specifically about the symbol on the clothing that you purchased. So let's say you purchased our t-shirt with the symbol for planting trees. Your t-shirt will have a scanned QR code that will take you directly to our Plant a Tree research blog where you can learn about the many benefits of trees, global deforestation, reforestation acts, and what you can do to make a difference. Last but certainly not least, with each purchase of Ecolite, we pledge to donate $2 to nonprofit organizations that are on the front lines of fighting for our ecosystem. We plan to target reforestation nonprofits and other organizations that fight over fishing, plastic pollution, air quality, and much more. To purchase Ecolite apparel, head to the Elite Graphics website, elitegraphics.org, or make your way to our sponsors page on our website, everythingsteam.org. So, do yourself a favor and get yourself some Ecolite apparel, the clothing line that combines fashion, sustainability, and learning. Ecolite, clothing done right. Well, we're back for the second segment of Birdology with Ranger Keith. So this segment is going to be on birds and their significance to the environment. So there are many significances, and we're going to try to cover them. And actually, we kind of found, we took a poll from the I guess the audience, my following, and we kind of outlined some of the key significances for you. So Keith, would you want to go through the first one, and that's actually on pollination? Well, first of all, I'd like to say that the primary pollinators, other than wind or typical types of erosion, is bees, but also up there is butterflies and birds. So, would you like to take it from there?
Yeah, I mean there are lots of butterflies and birds, bees, all, not just honeybees either, but there are loads and loads of solitary bees that we have and stuff
Correct.
too. But there are definitely some birds that are pollinators, and some that you might not even that you might even overlook. Everybody kind of knows about hummingbirds. There are a few hummingbirds too that are very specific to certain kinds of flowers, and those flowers depend on those birds in order to pollinate, because a lot of other things can't reach down the way the hummingbirds would.
Right. Right.
But also Orioles. Orioles are like Baltimore Orioles and Orchard Orioles are just showing back up here in West Tennessee. But there are several different kinds across the world. But Orioles do eat a lot of fruit, and they will get into nectar, and they're a great pollinator too. But there are several elsewhere too. The honey creepers, honey eaters. Some of the parrots are pollinators. So yeah,
Oh,
there are definitely many out there.
well, that makes sense. I mean, any bird that really comes into contact with, the flora that
Hmm.
does, and then they carry it, and, it's
Right.
kind of that process. So that
Hmm.
makes sense. And yeah, right. I mean, there's many different types of pollinators, but birds do a great aspect of that. So the next one that kind of came in was seed dispersal. I know you kind of gave a little segue there a little bit on eating fruit. So would you like to take that over?
Sure. I think it's important to realize too that these are just small examples, but when you
Yeah.
look at giant ecosystems, if you look at a species that's endemic to that system, that's been there for a long time, it has a it is a piece of that system. It's a piece of that web. And so
Right.
we can talk about things like pollination and seed dispersal and predation and things like that. But there are probably factors that make that species important to that system that may even be overlooked.
Right. Yeah, we're talking about a species, or we're talking about a group that has been evolving for 65 million years, plus or minus a few, after the KT extinction.
Hmm.
So, after mammalia kind of took over the world, after the reptiles fell off from the KT extinction, birds began to flourish.
Hmm.
So, over 65 million years, they have evolved in many ways to impact the ecosystem.
Right. And we'll probably talk about this later with migration and stuff like that, but you're not just
Mhm.
looking at one ecosystem either. And that's
Right.
one of those things that I think that with migratory birds, you're looking at a bird that it doesn't just go somewhere else and take off for a while. It's not on vacation. It's an integral part of the systems that it visits along the way and the system that it lands into. And so you're looking at a species that's important for ecosystems across a hemisphere instead of just like in one mountain range. So
Very
there,
true.
there are there's important things to think about there. But yeah, with seed dispersion, one of the coolest examples that we have around here is um, what's the mistletoe?
Oh,
Because mistletoe never touches the ground. It's the seeds are spread by birds. They will eat those seeds, and those seeds have a special coating on them that as soon as the bird poops it out, it's sticky, and so it sticks to the branches, and that's where it stays. That's how the plant grows. It's because the
wow.
seeds right when they come out, they're very sticky, and that's how mistletoe will spread from tree to tree. A lot of times up and down migratory pathways that birds take quite a bit. A great example, when I used to work at Mousetail Landing State Park, it's like 2.5 miles along the Tennessee River
Okay.
of bank, and like kind of uh, the like rugged country right next to the Tennessee River, and right in that gap between West and Middle Tennessee. There's this point that goes that's called Spring Creek, and there are so many birds that use the river there they're looking at the river as they're migrating and stuff. And there's this huge oak tree that's way out on the point in the river. You cannot miss it. And so I would just think it would be a great spot for a tired bird to rest. And that thing is covered in mistletoe because there are inevitably birds coming up and down the river, and they will land right there on that tree.
And do
So
their
yeah,
business.
yeah,
Nice.
mistletoe needs birds for sure. There are also negative aspects of that, where we see a lot of invasive plants that are spread by birds too. Things like
Oh,
Chinese privet, uh, uh, sacred bamboo, or nandina. There are several. What's
That's a good point.
another good one? I saw one today actually, and I'm trying to remember what it's called. Lily turf. It's also it's like an ornament. Most invasive species we have are ornamental plants, but lily turf, nandina, Chinese privet. There are several that are spread by birds that are invasive species too, and
Hmm.
and
That makes sense.
mhm.
Well, I mean, if you think about it, whenever you think invasive species and you're talking about hemisphere, it's definitely coming from another another portion of the world. So
Yeah, well, I mean,
I guess.
those were originally brought as ornamentals by humans and stuff. But if you're trying
Ah.
to say you're managing a natural area and you're trying to keep that ecosystem intact, those invasive species have a negative effect on the biodiversity there. And so you can spend a lot of time and energy, and in many cases, money clearing out Chinese privet and stuff. But a lot of if the more birds you have, you are going to have to constantly look for Chinese privet there.
That's a
'Cause
good
those just
that leads me to a really good question. So, if you have these Chinese privet and then you have all these birds coming in that are bringing this invasive species in, what can you do, I guess, not negatively to hurt the bird population, but to deter the bird population away from that specific ecosystem
well,
so
you
it doesn't
don't.
bring in them?
You
Oh,
don't. You're trying to set up most of the time, especially if you're managing a natural area or whatever, that's already a fragmented habitat more than likely. And so what you're trying to do is maintain that system. You're wanting more biodiversity. And so the birds are fine to come in, but you need
mhm.
to clear Chinese privet as it comes in, clear Nandina as it comes in, clear things like Mahonia or Oregon grape is another name for it,
Okay.
as they come in.
Okay.
It is a
So
lot of work.
I get it, and it's just a repeated
kind
work.
of a kind of a constant thing. Once Chinese and Chinese privet is one we deal with quite a bit in West Tennessee, that is spread by birds. But um, once it becomes very established, it'll grow into a tree. And so it shades the understory out, which prevents the native understory plants from developing in there. And it will eventually even prevent tree replacement too. So it'll destroy a forest within a few decades if you let it go long enough. And
Wow.
so it's much easier to get rid of when it's very small. a lot of times if somebody, I've seen this on several like system restorations or whatever, is there's a special attachment for a bobcat piece of equipment
Uh-huh.
where they just come in and will just grind the entire plant. And so you're basically just clearing the whole thing out, and then they'll pull up the new ones as they come up.
Huh. Wow.
It's a
Oh,
lot of
wow.
work though, man. Had
Yeah,
some
I
long
bet.
summers doing that.
I bet, but I guess somebody has to do that, so we don't have an ecosystem collapse.
Right. But the more people know about invasive plants and how we can how much of an effect they have on the biodiversity of those ecosystems that they end up dropping into, the better off we are.
Absolutely. I totally
Yeah.
agree. So the next one that came in from the community was based on predators. So they prey on many different types of arthropods, rodents, etc. So would you like to expand on that?
Sure. One of the best examples that I've seen, I recently did, this is another like bird watching while on tour story, but here in West Tennessee, it's hard to find a barn owl. It just doesn't happen very often. But I did a residency last year at Blue Note Jazz Club in Napa, California. We were there for like 4 days. It's like a 3 show a day thing. And I had some
Okay.
birders that just hit me up that are incredible out there. And they're like, we're going to take you bird watching every day. And that we went out on these vineyards and wineries, and they use barn owls as a rodent control. And like
Oh,
I'm not sure what the distance measurement of that you need for each box, but it felt like every 100 yards up and down these gravel roads there would be a barn owl box. They're everywhere, and they help control
wow.
that rodent population.
Wow. Man, I
Hmm.
wonder what the radius. So you're thinking that the radius of what they really control or hunt is 100 yards? I would
I don't know.
suspect it would be huge.
I don't know. They are, the boxes are everywhere up there. And for somebody that doesn't get to see barn owls very often, it just feels like there's one, like, it just feels like they're mailboxes. But there are
Wow.
quite a few barn owls out there, and they use them as rodent. They encourage them to come out onto the vineyards as rodent control.
Definitely. And one thing just popped into my mind in terms of just pest control is, as our environment warms, the arthropods are going to start moving north. So like one thing that's very relevant is the movement of like malaria north because of all the mosquito
Sure.
populations that are moving north. So birds are going to be absolutely like vital to just like fighting different pests. And also, I mean, it's like a natural pesticide, right, for farmers.
That's a lot of
Like you
people.
want birds.
A lot of people put up things like purple martin boxes and things like that, and encourage barn swallows and things like that because they're eating a lot of insects. Um,
Definitely.
there
Definitely.
are some crazy things that are going on with insects and birds as the climate changes. Uh, but a lot of it has to do with the insect. We're actually in a vast insect decline.
Very
Uh,
true. Very
yeah.
true. Yeah.
So we're worried about things like disease from malaria and stuff like that, but ecologically, we're losing a lot of biodiversity, and
Very
it's
true.
mhm.
Very true. I think we had a viral epidemiology episode. Man, it was a couple months ago, and we were just talking about like all the like we're talking about like viruses, and I guess I should have mentioned that the arthropods are actually in decline. I really want to have an entomology episode and
Yeah,
go over that. But yeah, but it's I guess that's a positive though to have birds in the area to kind of take out and be a natural insecticide rather
sure,
than something that we do as humans to our farms.
right,
Yeah. So another thing that was brought up was scavenging, and I know this kind of goes hand in hand with what I wanted to talk about. But
yeah.
would you like to introduce scavenging across
Well,
the?
there vultures are the main one people think of. Some of the corvids scavenge as well, and bald eagles do quite a bit of scavenging,
Okay.
more than people would think too. Everybody
Yeah.
thinks of a bald eagle as this giant, majestic, charismatic megafauna, but they do quite a bit of scavenging too. I saw a talk at Tennessee Academy of Science a number of years ago where they were setting up trail cams on deer carcasses and things like that, and there were quite a few eagles that will come in. And then anybody that spends some time where it's snowy will tell you that they do quite a bit of scavenging on the sides of roads and stuff like that too.
Wow.
They're not a main scavenger; they're mostly a fish
Yeah.
and waterfowl eater. But there are several birds that will scavenge other than vultures.
Yeah, you usually see what like vultures, crows, and ravens, right? Those are the
Hmm.
ones that come to my mind first. So one thing that I keep seeing, and it like pops up every once in a while, is how intelligent ravens are. Can you attest
Yeah,
to that?
all of the corvids, man. The crows, ravens, jays, brilliant. Yeah,
Yeah,
very
what's
smart.
funny? I was on my construction site today, and this is
Mhm.
so weird because we were having this podcast today, and I was wearing a bird shirt.
Oh, nice.
It's so weird. So I'm walking back, and we have people that like blow whistles if we're flying stuff across with cranes, so everybody's
Mhm.
aware.
Yeah.
There was no cranes running, and there was a raven just chilling out like on a pile of steel, and it was mimicking the whistles.
Yeah,
I
they
was
can do
like,
a lot of that.
yo, that's amazing. The
Yeah.
ravens are so smart. Like I've seen videos of ravens like trying to talk, like mimic what humans say. It's so
Mhm.
crazy.
Mhm. A lot of
Wow.
if you look at a lot of people that have like befriended crows or ravens or any of the corvids over the years, especially crows because they're very social. uh
Oh,
Not only will they like mimic your sounds and stuff, but they will use that information to tell other crows that you are near. I've seen where
really?
people will that are trying to befriend crows or feeding crows or whatever. A lot of times they'll walk outside with whole peanuts and they'll make a sound like psh, 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 or some kind of sound to get the crow's attention. And if they do that every time while they place the food down, eventually those crows, whenever you walk outside and place the food down, that crow will make whatever sound you're making, be like, psh, 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 like, hey, the lady is here with the peanuts.
Wow.
And that's how that's your name now. You just gave them your name. Your name is now.
Nice.
But yeah, and then and crows are very social, and they'll teach their families and offspring too. And so you may have a friend in those for several generations after that as well. Not only
Wow.
that, but they will also hold a grudge for generations too,
Yeah, yeah, it's true.
against certain places that are dangerous, or they're very smart and they teach their friends what they're seeing.
Wow.
Yeah, the corvids are brilliant. There's another. I recently read a book. This is a great book. Just came out this came out in March of last year. This is not about crows. This is about caracaras. This is about striated caracaras. But all of
Okay.
the caracaras are absolutely brilliant. This is by Jonathan Myberg, A Most Remarkable Creature. These are like the intelligence of some of these birds is it's amazing. So I would definitely recommend that book.
Okay. Definitely. It's definitely going on my
I'll send you a
list.
copy as a gift.
Oh man. Wow, I'd really appreciate
If
that.
you find time between your like two jobs and your busy life,
I definitely enjoy some reads, but
nice.
jumping back to what we were talking about, scavenging, and you said about vultures, and getting ready for this podcast, I was doing a little bit of a dive on vultures. I'm like, it's so crazy, the stuff that like the layperson, like myself, I don't know anything about birds other than I just appreciate them. But vultures are amazing
Yeah.
pieces of nature. Like, so apparently, if you know anything about chemistry, they have a very low pH, like stomach acid, like
Mm,
very low. Some of the species has like a pH of 1,
mm,
like very acidic. And if
yeah.
they're in the presence of a predator, they will vomit on them to
Oh yeah.
ward off their predators.
They absolutely will.
But like the scavenging aspect, the main reason why they like how it's their nature's calling is they'll eat up these dead carcasses that are more than likely full of disease. So what they're really doing is saving the rest of the ecosystem from diseases like rabies, malaria, etc. And I, I find that so fascinating. We always just think about like, oh, they're a scavenger, they're just eating, dead organisms before the fungi get to them or bacteria or what have you. But to say that like they're actually saving different species from exposure. So like, I can't remember. I watched a TEDx video where because of how's it go? I can't remember if I think it was China where they had like 20,000 some deaths last year due to rabies, because there's like, if you look at the population decrease of vultures relative to the increase of rabies outbreak
Hmm.
in China, it's like directly proportional, like
Wow.
directly. Yeah. So they're
People are
not
coming
breaking down.
yeah.
Yeah.
People are
And then
coming in
the
contact with
rats,
dead rabbit. Yeah.
yeah, rats,
Wow.
dogs, they'll get rabies and they'll just go infect people
Mm,
or whatever, animals, etc. And then
wow.
they just spread disease. And that's their natural, that's one of their big natural callings, is to
That's
save the
brilliant.
ecosystem. Yeah.
Yeah, that I mean
Super cool.
that part of it being a system is those nutrients have to go back into the system. They're just making it just expediting the process.
Yeah. Oh, and of course, I forgot to say this, that, because the reason why they're saving the ecosystem is because they're ingesting these viruses, and the
Mm,
viruses come in contact with the low pH acidity, and then it like kills it. So
right.
that's so fascinating.
Right.
That's
You're
so fascinating.
turning diseased carrion into clean vulture poop.
And then wow. Wow. And one thing I really, I guess, want to raise a little bit of an awareness of is, in the video, they were talking about one of the reasons why there's such a huge drop off in population for vultures is, maybe this is also a preface to the next segment, but so in Africa with poachers, like poachers that are going after like rhinos and elephants, what they'll do is they'll try to cover their tracks by injecting a poison into the carcasses of the bodies,
Whoa.
and it's actually killing vultures at an unprecedented pace. That way, the vultures don't give signal to the local authorities that poaching is going on in that area.
Oh, I see.
Yeah. So like
Wow.
one a TEDx video said that one rhinoceros that is injected with poison kills about 500 vultures.
Man.
Yeah. Crazy. Crazy. But I mean, it's just to show importance that like they need to be in the environment. They need to stick around to
Right.
help mitigate disease spread.
Right. Think conservation gets really, really complicated when you're talking about a species that lives across an entire hemisphere, you know?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Mhm.
And even like they're so like majestic. Some of them can fly at like, I can't remember if it was 11,000 feet or 11,000 meters, but it was like so like it was farther up into the atmosphere than
Mhm.
any other bird species. And I'm like,
Yeah.
whoa,
We see
what do
that
you
a lot
need to
in
see up there?
we see it a lot in like when turkey vultures and stuff migrate, or even the hawks will migrate in the daytime. They do a behavior called kettling, and they will where most of our passerines, like our songbirds and stuff like that, are migrating at night, so they're flying super fast at night. But
Oh,
the big birds are migrating in the day because they're taking advantage of thermals. And so something like a turkey vulture that's migrating is going to find a thermal, and it circles higher and higher and higher and higher. And a lot of times you'll see several vultures, hundreds of vultures even, in the same thermal. And it circles higher and higher and then dumps itself out of the top of that thermal and glides all the way to the next one. And so they can fly for miles and miles, or migrate for miles and miles, and just barely even flap.
oof. Taking advantage of Bernoulli's a little bit. I
Yeah.
would say
Yeah.
that's amazing.
A lot of the raptors do that, and the vultures.
Jeez, man, I wish that was something I could do. It'd be really cool.
Yes.
With airfare, the cost of airfare today,
Yeah, it's
dang.
way better for the environment too.
Oh, for
For
sure,
sure.
for sure. So I don't know how. I'm sure you're very familiar with this, but I want to get your take on it. So so with birds and their migration patterns. Now, I'm curious. I've seen some things that some scientists are saying that birds have a compound related to in their nose and
Mhm.
in their skulls that allow them to see or map out the Earth's magnetic fields so that they know what's north and south.
Mhm.
And with that metal in there, some form of iron, I can't remember what it was, but like that kind of tells them a direction heading. Have you ever heard of that? I
Yeah,
mean, maybe that might sound
that's
really pseudo, but maybe it's not. I don't know. I'm
that's in
curious.
some of them. That Scott Weidenthal actually talks about that, about like navigation strategies across different taxa of birds, quite a bit in his first book, Living on the Wind. That was the book that actually got me started. Like whenever I first started birding, I read this book and it blew my mind, and that's when I really got started. But there are, across different groups of birds, there are different strategies, and a lot of times it's a combination of several, where they may be sensing magnetic fields. They may also be using landmarks. They may also be using the stars, uh,
Yeah.
or a combination of all those things. A lot of times with I know with like the ducks and geese, well, there are birds that inherently know their migration routes. They're born, and at a certain critical day length, something clicks, and they say, "Oh, I must go," and they go to a place they've never been before, but they know it's there. Some of them are taught their migratory patterns, like some of the cranes and the ducks and geese. They learn it from their parents, and so that's why, when you
Yeah.
see a bunch of Canada geese at your park that never go anywhere else, is because they were never taught to go anywhere else by their parents. Or that's why here, when we have everybody gets really excited when we have whooping cranes that come through Tennessee and
Mm.
end up in North Alabama. They're endangered, and we have,
Oh,
I think last year we had like 17, I could be wrong, at Wheeler National Wildlife Refuge, 17 17 whooping cranes in tens of thousands of sandhill cranes, and that's because whooping cranes population went so low that they forgot their migratory routes, and so people started releasing young whooping cranes with the sandhill cranes so that the sandhill cranes will show the whooping cranes where to go.
Oh,
So
nice.
some birds know, some birds have crazy powers and know where they're supposed to go, and some birds have to be taught. There's a lot of
that's the beauty of evolution, man.
Dude.
It's just nature trying out different stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Wow, that's so cool. And then, of course, like you said, it could just be, it doesn't have to be it does or it doesn't use this and that's it. It could be using multiple things.
Right. Yeah.
Right.
There's I forget the study. I should have looked up the paper, but Scott Weidensaw references a paper where they tested bird migratory, like bird navigation abilities through several different ways, and a lot of it was using like putting a bird in an enclosure and then adjusting the day length of the room to see what triggered the migratory instinct. They would put fake star maps over it so that the bird was using fake star maps and showing which way it would try to fly. And so there are several different ways that they tested that to see what kind of combination different birds are using.
That's a cool experiment. That's
yeah.
really cool. Wow. So we do have one more thing, and it seems that the last thing that was important to the audience was indicators of environmental factors across the grand scale. Do you want to elaborate, and then we can round out, go to commercial break, and get into segment 3?
Sure. I think this it's a great way to kind of segment or segue into segment 3 here, because we're
definitely
I think birds from a migratory patterns and things like that from an environmental educator perspective is a great way. It's a great way to get people interested in complex systems and complex problems that we may have, because once you see a bird that's I think there's a technique that we use called rapid bioassessment, where if you're looking at the health of a stream, you can go in and take a little measurement of the dissolved oxygen of the stream. You can use a little tool and measure the turbidity or the stream velocity or whatever. Or you can look at the aquatic macroinvertebrates and the fish and things like that that live in the stream that are constantly sampling those water conditions and look at the tolerance levels of those organisms across different variables and look at what the stream is like long term. And so if we are looking at birds or trying to teach people about things that are going on in the environment, or getting them to ask questions about things that are going on in the world, look at a cute critter that is flying across an ocean and sampling the ecosystems between two continents. That's where you can draw broad strokes and show people the interconnectedness of all of it. And so I think that's there's a lot of value in that for environmental educators or in science communicators.
Definitely. Most definitely. Yeah, I like that. There's a numbers game to it, but then there's the observations. Right. And wow. Yeah, I mean, it makes sense. I mean, even if you're not getting the migratory paths, you don't have the numbers that you used to. They're eating differently, or they're spreading, this invasive species, this year, and they weren't last year, or what have you. There's so many different cases out there that can tell you what's going on in the world.
Right.
Because like you said, go ahead.
Something like one species of shorebird that's migrating up and down a coastline, all up and down an entire coastline. They are depending on the horseshoe crabs of this one bay to lay their eggs all at this one specific time. But something we did has disrupted the habits of the horseshoe crabs. And then once the birds get there, that critical stop is gone.
Right.
And so it shows you that things we do here will probably affect things elsewhere too.
Yeah. And maybe to put it in our perspective, it's like you're taking a trip. You're going on vacation and you're taking a drive, and you have everything packed. you have your food, you got your gas and your clothing, everything packed up, and you start to drive, and you get to your first, you have everything mapped out. You got, your stops, where you're eating, where you're staying, where you're sleeping, where you're grabbing gas, and you get to the first gas station. You're almost on E, and there's no gas station.
Yep.
And then, that's probably the most simplest
That's
I can make it.
That's exactly it. Yeah.
Yeah. Wow. I mean, like, and of course, what's your response? Your response is like, not to be rude, holy shit.
Yeah.
Like, what am I gonna do?
Looks like I'm stranded in the desert now,
Yeah. I've driven out west a few times, and to like gas, if you don't plan your gas out right and you don't stop, you run out of gas.
Right.
Like there's no options.
Right.
You're lucky to get like a gas station every, I don't know, 50 miles maybe, and that might be the deal breaker.
Right. There'll be
wherever you're at.
signs like last gas, like make sure you top off.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. So yeah, I mean, just looking back at the list, I'm sure there's so many that we missed, but they're all really good. So.
Right. Well, I'm gonna recommend some articles and stuff in there too, because I will inevitably just kind of ramble and stuff, And so I'll give you some resources from people that sound intelligent,
It's better to cover your
right.
tail.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So now that we kind of covered those main topics, I think we're going to head into our last commercial break. But then when we come back, Keith and I are going to discuss climate change, or just anthropogenic changes, as well as natural changes to birds. So stick around. Have you ever been standing in the shower looking at the ingredients on your shampoo bottle and noticed that water is always the first ingredient? Well, I have. After a little research, I discovered that shampoo is over 80% water, which is kind of like dumping bottled water on your head while you're standing in a shower. And that's why I'm excited that I found Seabar, a disposable plastic-free hair care line that cleans up ocean trash with every purchase. Not only does Seabar pick up 1 pound of ocean trash for every item ordered, but their salon quality shampoo and conditioner concentrates come from refillable applicators, kind of like deodorant tubes. Just twist them up, rub it on over your hair a couple times, and then just lather it up like you normally would. My favorite part is how long they last. I've personally been using the same Seabar for 3 months now, and I've barely used any. So not only does it help save the environment, it's also effective, efficient, and most importantly, it saves me money. If you would like to try a better way to wash your hair, head on over to seabar.com and use our special code STEAM for 15% off your first order. Seabar, shampoo done right for you and the planet. Well, you made it this far. This is the third segment of Birdology with Ranger Keith. So this episode, this segment is going to be, it's going to be a little gloomy, but it's also going to be informative, and then we're also going to end it out on a good note. So bear with us. We would like to inform you on climate change and the different things that have been seen, their trends that we have seen in the scientific community based on our aviary friends. So without further ado, I would like to hand it over to Keith, and maybe he could talk about migration patterns, since we've discussed it a few different times throughout the episode.
Sure. I mean, I think we've touched on a lot of this a few times in here, just a little bit, but I think as far as climate change goes, there's some resources that I could point people out to, in some books and things like that. But so I won't go into like very species specific examples of some of the trends we're seeing in kind of ecological disturbance with birds in response to climate change. But one of the ones that would be easy for you to think about in your everyday life, like right now we're in spring migration in the eastern US. One of the things we're seeing is kind of a disruption in the normal patterns of when foliage comes out, when insects are hatching, when insects are like plentiful enough to support a population of their predators. And those are things that have to line up perfectly with not just migration for birds to migrate from like South America, fly across the Gulf of Mexico, then come all the way up through North America and end up in the boreal forest, but like not just to make that trip, but also to support themselves and thrive enough to reproduce when they get there. And so
Right.
if the insects aren't there in the proper numbers, or if they've already come and developed into pupae before the birds get there so that they can feed their young, then you're looking at higher mortalities in the young. Or maybe the parents don't get to reproduce at all because now all of their habitat is fringe habitat. Now it's not suitable for them once they've arrived because that window of suitability has already come and gone. And as those climates change, they have to go farther to reach that suitable habitat. And so it's disrupting a lot of that. There are also not just factors in birds that are going from one continent to another, but also think about things like elevation, because there's some birds that don't migrate from North America to South America and back. There are some that just migrate up and down the mountain, you know.
Yeah.
And so as things change, those environments change for them too. And so maybe the top of the mountain doesn't get as cold as it once did. Like maybe it's not supporting the same ecosystem at the top as it once did. And where are we going to go now? What are we going to do now? The whole ecosystem has changed. And when you look at that in combination with things like drastic habitat change, like anthropogenic habitat change, just from developments or pollution or what have you, then you look at habitat fragmentation, like some things. I know a lot of people don't think about this, but you just look at things like grasslands, large grasslands. We've lost 99% of our grasslands in North America. That's a critical habitat, and we used to have loads of it. We don't have very much of it at all now. But even things like the different levels of an intact forest, there's a difference between like your, 10-acre patch of woodland and what would be suitable forest for birds that live in the woodland interior. Those birds can't escape from things like brown-headed cowbirds or nesting predators or things like that anymore. So
Right.
when you combine climate change with things like habitat disruption, habitat fragmentation, habitat loss altogether, invasive species, invasive plants, invasive predators, there are loads of things all at once. And I think that as like anthropogenic changes to the environment and climate change speed up, we're going to see that kind of exponentially rise.
Yeah.
To where a lot of, I think especially our migratory birds that are moving from, so many things have to line up perfectly for this bird to get from Brazil to New York,
Right.
So many things have to line up along that pathway. They have to be able to feed, and like, I don't know how many times they increase their own body weight to make that migration, but then they have to be able to thrive when they get there. So many different environmental factors have to line up all across the way. There are a few, one of the best primers I've seen on the kind of a primer on effects of climate change in birds. You can, if you're looking for peer-reviewed literature for the primary literature on that sort of stuff, you can go down a rabbit hole. I would encourage people that aren't familiar with that to just start off with the USDA article. That's a great way to get started. There's a USDA article called Effects of Climate Change on Terrestrial Birds of North America. Read through that, and then go through into the related links and recommended reading. Most of it is also going to be primary literature too, so you're looking at peer-reviewed journal articals.
Yep, that's the idea.
Yeah, if you want some light reading, that's also really, these are the books that I've probably recommended these books 3 times in this podcast, but some of my favorite books to get people started with just thinking about broad ecosystems and how birds can show us how those things connect are Scott Weidensaul's book. Ken Kaufman also has a great one, but that's especially if you're in like Ohio. Ken Kaufman has a great one. It's this one just came out last year, A Season on the Wind Inside the World of Spring Migration by Ken Kaufman. Brilliant book.
Nice.
These two are some of my favorite bird books of all time that aren't like field guides. Living on the Wind Across the Hemisphere with Migratory Birds by Scott Weidensaw. I remember when I bought this book, I was in college. It was recommended to me when I first started getting into birding by our ornithology professor. And this was back in the day when you could buy books on Amazon for a penny and then you paid for shipping. It's pre-Amazon Prime. I got some gray hairs going on in here. It's pre-Amazon Prime back in my day. But yeah, this is brilliant. This one just came out recently, and this is like the follow-up to Living on the Wind. This is A World on the Wing. And this is where Scott Weidensaw is not just looking, he's kind of just expanding into Asia and Africa to a little bit more than he did in the first book. But this is a brilliant book.
Nice. You know, and one other thing I think you didn't mention with climate change is also the increase in severity of weather, right? That's also going to contribute to the change in migration pattern, but also just disrupting the ecosystems where they're trying to sit down to, continue throughout their migration paths.
Right, and that may not even happen in just ways that you would initially think. Think about things like severe storms affecting birds while they're flying, while they're all migrating. Migration, one of our main songbird migration happens in large clumps. It's so large you can watch it on Doppler radar. You can watch birds take off. For years they didn't know what it was. They called them sky angels. You would just see this come out right at dusk as all these passerines, all these songbirds would come up out of the trees and head out on migration. And so you're looking at large clumps. And if that all gets hit by a storm, maybe if they don't just fall out and like run into something, but a lot of times they starve to death because they're burning so many calories. Birds have a much higher metabolic rate than we do. Not just over forests and things too. There's a thing called fallout that happens periodically, and some birders get super excited about it just to see several different species. But if you think about birds that are crossing a large body of water overnight, a bird like the size of my thumb is going to fly across the Gulf of Mexico in the middle of the night. There's no place to stop and rest, burning a ridiculous amount of calories. Suddenly they have a headwind and they could starve to death before morning and just fall out of the sky. And so a lot of times what happens when there's a fallout is those birds are exhausted, and the very first sight of land, they just hit the beach. And so you'll see American redstarts, American redstarts, all kinds of warblers, everything all at once, just on the ground on the beach.
Wow.
That's what a fallout is. But not just that stuff too, but think about long-term ecological effects, things like fire, what we're seeing right now.
Very true.
Yep. Not just the effects on fire of like actually burning the birds, but changing the landscape, allowing different types of plants to go through that wouldn't normally be in there.
Right. High intensity fires are a big no-no.
Right.
Low intensity is fine. High intensity fires is bad. Like low intensity fires have happened for thousands. I'm just going to say thousands, but very, 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 very
right.
long time.
That system is used to that. That system has adapted to that. That's part of it. But intensity fires, a lot of times you're encouraging invasives that burn at higher temperature and just destroys habitat.
Right. And I don't remember that's the correct scientific term, but whenever you get a high intensity fire, it's more probabilistic to go not only on the ground, but treetop to treetop. But like low intensity fires will burn along the ground. So the high intensity fires, just take out the treetops, which takes out where the birds are hanging out,
Right.
And even just high intensity fires on the ground, if you have different bird species that tend to burrow during fire events, they'll still get cooked out because it's so intense. It's so they'll just, literally burn up under there, unfortunately. I mean, fires are a big thing. I had a fire ecology podcast way back when. That was a really good podcast.
That's cool.
And and it was, I can't remember the forestry agency that did a study that said that if we had 3-degree increase with our WUI, our wildlife or wildland urban interface, if we had a 3 degrees Celsius global temperature increase, you would see a 600% increase in wildfire
Wow.
in areas that are arid,
Yeah.
in areas that are fire prone, which
Mm.
is rough.
Yeah.
It's really bad.
Right.
That extends fire season too.
Mm.
So there's also that, and there's also one more thing that I would like to touch on, and of course you can add after this, but just our buildings alone. I didn't realize how big of an effect that our buildings have on like taking out bird populations, because they just think that they can fly through a structure and they just hit glass. And
Right.
it comes back to, evolution. We have developed these skyscrapers, these buildings or whatever. It doesn't have to be a skyscraper, just buildings in record time.
Mm.
And these evolution's very, very slow.
Mm.
We've been able to do this because of technology. I argue that our evolution has not caught up with our technology, and that's the reason why we are the way we are. But
Why everybody's stressed out.
yeah, nevertheless, birds have not evolved to understand that this is something solid,
Mm.
and they're
Yeah.
dying at unprecedented rates because of our structures. Kind of
Mm.
crazy.
That's the second highest cause of like anthropogenic, like human related bird mortality is windows and utility towers.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh,
Because
yeah,
like,
that's true. True
right,
utilities.
with things like light pollution, it affects their ability to navigate. They may see the reflection of
Oh,
something
yeah.
and think that it's something different and fly into it like it's a like they'll see the reflection of a perch or something like that. Or even if they're on migration, they just see the reflection of nothing. Um, but the I know in with radio towers, one of the bigger things is those giant blinking red lights in the middle of the night. A lot of times they will
Uh,
become disoriented by the red light and they just begin circling, and they'll circle and circle and circle until they
oh, wow.
run out of gas or they hit a wire.
Wow. Wow. Oh, I didn't even think about that. And I
Yeah.
didn't even think about light pollution, which makes sense. I mean, this definitely involves like the bird species that are traveling at night and
Mm.
also
Which is
rely maybe.
most of the songbirds.
Yeah, and they also probably rely on like star navigation, I'm
Right.
assuming. And
Hmm.
that's the big problem. I really wish that like most big cities would like Flagstaff here in Arizona, they have an observatory up there, so they have to, they have to understand that there's light pollution, so they
Hmm.
change their street lights and signs and whatnot, what have you, to a more friendly application. I forget what that's called. That's gonna bother me. But
I
either
re-
way, I mean, that's very important. Yeah.
I recently read a paper about like a large commercial building in I can't remember the name of the paper either. It was a large commercial building in Chicago that just looked at different times of turning off the lights, or just especially during peak bird migration, and
Nice.
significantly uh, uh, decrease the mortality of birds during the migratory season. It's a
Ooh.
pretty easy fix
Yeah, of
for a
course.
lot
I
of that.
mean, and you save a little bit of
In
money.
many cases, yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Oh, how familiar are you with anthropogenic with this influence, fireworks? So I've seen a lot of like different studies, different people just talking about how fireworks really go after birds. Like they get shocked. They get shocked by
I
it.
could see
Like,
that.
yeah, yeah.
I could see that
Look
happening.
into that. I think
I
I
should.
think you'd be interested in
I
that.
haven't read any papers on that.
Yeah, I can't remember the numbers, but just the amount of I'm sorry, I don't mean to laugh. The amount of
Yeah.
numbers that of deaths that come out of the 4th of July is
Hmm.
insane.
Yeah.
Like just insane. Uh, so I'm not really excited about
Understandable.
fireworks that much anymore.
Yeah.
Well, at least maybe in a forest. I mean, if it's over, well, man, even over water, I think you're still dealing with it, but it's definitely less.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's something to think about. I do your research, but
Yeah. I'll
I
check it
know
out.
I know that's a big one.
I'll
Yes,
check it
man,
out for sure.
light pollution, and I definitely knew about that. Whenever I was looking into vultures, they said that like the poison and and utility lines were the
Mhm.
big ones for
Mhm.
sure.
Ken
So
Kaufman has in Ken Kaufman's book talks about light pollution at length. It's pretty good.
okay, yeah, it'd be good to know about that for sure. And even just like, you know, you might be wondering like, what does that matter to me? I mean, we still vote, right?
Sure.
So you could also voice and talk to your local representatives more easily than you could talk to a senator or, you know, someone in the
Yeah.
House. But talk
Chamber
to, like, you know, right.
Chamber of
Talk to the
Commerce.
chamber.
Yeah.
And that seems a much easier feat,
Yeah.
if you're
For
really interested, for
small
sure.
local changes, for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. But yeah, so I don't know. Would you like to end on a better note here, or do you
Please.
have anything to add to that before we move
No,
on?
no. Like I said, if you're putting this on YouTube or whatever, if you put things in the description, I can link a bunch of different articles and stuff like that, so that
Would
people
love
have
that.
different resources for sure.
Send me the articles, and I'll be sure to put
Yeah.
it up. That way, everybody can, yeah, get a good education on this.
Yeah.
It's super important. So maybe we can finish out the episode by talking about your spark bird. What do you think?
Yeah. So in unlike, I guess, among birders and stuff, a lot of people have what they call a spark bird, which is it's the nerdiest thing ever, I guess. It is like, so I grew up as a naturalist and stuff like that, and I was always outside and always been interested in uh doing frog call surveys and catching snakes and looking at all this different stuff. And I was not into birds, but the your spark bird is the bird that you see that you're like, oh, whoa, wait a minute, and that's what gets you hooked into it. That's what gets you to start looking at things. And to me, that's just you are opening your perspective to a much wider world than you were previously aware of. And mine, I'd already been working for Tennessee State Parks for a while. I was mainly, all my like environmental education stuff was mostly in reptiles and amphibians. That was what my undergrad research was on. I didn't care about birds very much. But I was living at the visitor center at Reelfoot Lake State Park. There's a little apartment in there for their seasonal staff. And I was living in there at the time, and I was doing most of my research in that area on reptiles and amphibians. And one of my best friends was working on that survey with me. His name was Stephen Pitts, and his dad was the ornithology professor at UT Martin, where I went to school. And I idolized Dr. Pitts, coolest dude. And he's retired now, but he just called me up out of the blue one day, and he was like, "Oh, hey, Keith, there's a are you down at Real Foot?" And I was like, "Yeah, I'm down here. I'm at the cabin." And he was like, "There's a real weird bird over close to you. You want to jump out there with me and go see it?" I was like, "Yeah, sure." And I climbed in the biology department truck with him and drove out into like rural Northwest Tennessee in the middle of winter. Okay, so Tennessee doesn't get snow very often. Northwest Tennessee is like, when you think about like Rocky Top Tennessee, and I'm on like the flat, swampy side of the state. It's not mountains and stuff. It is brown and gray. That is the landscape. It's so flat you can see tomorrow coming in, And so we're driving around in these. We left the beautiful swamps where I call it home, and we go out in these soybean fields. That's it. And we just pull over the truck in the middle of this soybean field, and I was like, "This is where it's at." And he's like, "Yeah, this is where it's at." And we looked up, and it's a bird's called a rough-legged hawk, and they are
Okay.
normally way farther north than Tennessee. Every now and again, they'll pop in for a little bit in the wintertime. Usually it's a juvenile that's getting pushed further down into fringe habitat. But we were looking at this rough-legged hawk that was sitting on a power line. Like these are one of the few hawks that have feathers that go all the way down their toes. And
Oh,
the thing is just incredible. And I was looking at that, and I was like, "Where is this from?" He was like, way north, way north." I was like, why are we looking at it? He was like, it's not supposed to be here. It's here by accident. And I was looking at that bird, like realizing that I come from like a town of less than 5,000 people in West Tennessee, just like small town kid, never thought I would do anything or amount to anything, you know what I mean? And at the time I was like a junior in college, and I was sitting there under this power line in this drab landscape where I grew up, looking at a bird that in its juvenile year had been farther than I ever thought I would ever go. Like had seen more things and been farther than I ever thought I would go. And it just blew my mind. And I was like
Nice.
instantly hooked, dude. And so I started reading and studying how far birds go and where they go and when they leave and when they come back. And that's what I've been doing ever since.
That's amazing. So that's your spark bird. So I
Yeah,
think
rough-legged dog for sure.
that's awesome. So what you're saying is that y'all need to find your spark bird
Yeah.
for
It's still
sure.
that stuff. And when you ask me like what my favorite bird and stuff is, that kind of stuff happens week to week too. Like today, we're in the
Mhm.
middle of the songbird migration right now. Today I heard a Kentucky warbler. It was the first one I've heard this year. It just dropped right in. I was like, "Oh!" I'm at a park that's like a mile from my house. It's a tiny little park, but I'm
Nice.
like the only one that goes bird watching there. But I was I was over there, and it just popped right in and started calling. I was like, man, there's no telling where this thing came from, and then now it is just in this tiny little park, in the
That's
middle of
awesome.
West Tennessee. And so that kind of stuff, I get like a new favorite bird every day just because something new happens. I'm like, whoa, man, there's no telling where all you've been.
Wow.
And now you're here.
Wow. Hey, just one more quick thing. I don't mean to one up you or anything, but you said that you came from a small town, about 5,000 people.
Yeah.
I grew up in a village in Western Pennsylvania that had like
Oh yeah.
200 people,
Oh
maybe.
yeah. Yeah. The like where you go to a gas station and somebody's like, "What's your mom and daddy's name?" Or
Oh, for
they
sure.
may not say that sound like that up there.
You know what? You're pretty dang close, but no, you're absolutely right. I've had that awe moment where I said, like when Matt Broussard messaged me, I was like, it was like my holy crap moment. Like, wow, like,
It's a great big
man,
world out there.
yeah, anybody's capable of anything.
Yeah.
So for sure. But man, Keith, it's been a great time. Ranger Keith, it's been a great time talking about birds, talking about your story. It's been wonderful. I hope that we've inspired or just, informed some great people out there on birds and their importance to the environment. And, it was just great having a good conversation with you, man.
Yeah, Sam. Thanks for having me, man. Really
Yeah.
appreciate it. It's fun hanging out with you.
Yeah, absolutely. That is all for this episode of Everything STEAM. Now I'd like to give a big shout out to my guest star Keith for sharing his knowledge and vast expertise. Also, go check out Keith on TikTok at Ranger Keith and give Blood, Sweat, and Tears a listen whenever you get some free time. I would also love to mention my amazing team for their collective efforts to make this show happen. This podcast was edited by myself, marketed by Courtney Page and Maria Positeri, as well as being QC'd by my man Panyapit Urixit. After the episode, please give our podcast a rating and review on whatever platform you get your podcast on. We're always looking for feedback, and the rating would greatly help us in the fight against the algorithms. Lastly, be sure to check us out on all the socials for podcast news, upcoming episodes, and fun STEAM content. Just search Everything STEAM on Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, Twitter, and Reddit to join in on the fun. Once again, thank you for listening to Everything STEAM. I am your host, Sam Stanford, and as always, stay curious.
Everything Steam would like to give a shout out to Anchor by Spotify for sponsoring our podcast along with Ben Sound Music for providing our show with intro, outro, and advertising background rhythm.